Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. You're watching Women's AM with myself, Ayan, and on the panel today I am joined by Sister Nusrat, Sister Laika and Sister Sakina. So sisters, welcome back. Sakina, mashallah, we know that you are part of the duo Poetic Pilgrimage, but you also do your own poetry, mashallah. Yes. So tell us a little bit about that.
Alhamdulillah. So yeah, I've been part of Poetic Pilgrimage. Actually, before we converted to Islam, we started our group. And then as we, embraced Islam, our group, Poetic Pilgrimage, became a Muslim. All of our Islamic experience has been as artists, actually. We were really encouraged in the early days by people like Mecca to Medina to kind of continue what we were doing before, but just kind of make it a bit more relevant to the Muslim community. So we've been doing that I've been Muslim for 10 years now, so alhamdulillah. So I've been doing that for a while. But about 3 years ago, Munira went to Sudan for a year. And I think that was the first time I'd ever in my whole life had a break from Poetic Pilgrimage. So I think what happened is that a lot more poetry, like just different poetry, was kind of coming through. Before, our stuff was a lot more about like kind of what's happening in the world. It was a bit more political, what's going on in Palestine or what's happening in Yemen, or it was more like external.
It was more current.
Yeah, it was like this. It was almost like using our art form as a form of news, if you see what I mean. But then I think when Munira went away and I kind of had like my own internal time and my own internal experiences, I realized that this different poetry was coming out of me that was a lot more personal, was a lot more spiritual. So yeah, that's kind of some of the things that I'm working on at the moment as well.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, it's so lovely to see sisters who are being creative, because a lot of the times we don't see enough of that. We always tend to see sisters who are very, mashallah, very academic, nothing wrong with that, but we also tend to miss that spirituality. So mashallah, it's really, really good to have an example of sisters who are able to do that. Alhamdulillah. Well, moving on to today's topic, where we talk about arts and spirituality. So let's move on with that. Spirituality is an important and integral part of the life of a Muslim and takes place in various forms. Likewise, this may manifest into shaping both the artistic work and its persona. However, within the Muslim community, sometimes there's not much encouragement nor emphasis placed on arts and how spirituality can enhance the artistic form. Some even think that both are mutually exclusive. But how can spirituality enhance art, and what do we know about this from our own history? As always, this is a live discussion, so please do share your comments and questions to the panel. The number is on your screens now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #WAM15. So Sister Sakina, I'm going to come to you first. When we talk about spirituality, we talk about just, acts of worship, but how has it influenced art?
So, I mean, when you think about art in general, it's a spiritual experience. Most artists will talk about sometimes writing poetry or writing songs, and it's almost as though you have a moment where the poems come through you, That is a very spiritual experience. Like, for me, I can't really think of a time where I've written, particularly my poetry that's about Allah or the poetry about the Prophet ﷺ, that hasn't been like a really spiritually empowering experience for me. And when I perform it, sometimes I perform my poetry and I feel like I've just done ibadah. Does that make sense? Like,
so it helps you to reconnect with Allah, to reconnect with the message of Islam.
Definitely. Like, even like one of the poems I wrote about the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, I wrote it like I'd just become a Muslim and we were commissioned to do a piece, and so me and Munira were talking like, what concept are we going to do? And we weren't sure how we were going to tackle this story of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so then I was time for Dhuhr, so I prayed Dhuhr, I went into sujood, and then the idea came straight away. Then when I came out of Dhuhr and I wrote it, it was like I wrote it all in one go, if you see what I mean. And like every time I perform it, either I start crying or someone else in the audience starts crying. Not to say like I had some divine inspiration, but I'm just saying that like sometimes these things come and it's like a very spiritual experience for everyone involved. So, art in general is spiritual,
because it gives you that sort of connection, that emotional connection with yourself, and also with what it is that you're trying to convey. Definitely. And especially, I'm sure with you, sister, because of the fact that you talk about Allah, and you talk about the Prophet ﷺ, it helps you to actually gain that closeness as well. Definitely. That you probably wouldn't otherwise have. So, subhanAllah, it's quite amazing to see people's experience through various art forms and how that helps ground them emotionally and even spiritually. But there are members of the Muslim community who believe that sometimes spirituality and art are mutually exclusive. I mean, is that the case, and why, really?
I think, yes, within the Muslim community, there are people that think that art and spirituality are mutually exclusive, and the reason for this, it comes back to also our social setting. Because we live in a secular society where religion, especially spirituality, is compartmentalised and is often relegated to the private sphere, we see it as not having an impact in something like art or doing something, or in whatever field that is. We don't see it's having an impact in something that can produce artistic results. And invariably, because of this social setting, it has affected Muslim thinking on that amongst some members of the community. And so we generally tend to either discourage it, because sometimes we don't know, or we just don't see it as important. Then this comes back to also lack of knowledge, because a lot of Muslims, particularly within the community, have sometimes a very narrow understanding sometimes of history. They don't kind of look at it in the wholly encompassing form that it is, that spirituality has influenced things like architecture, which we'll go on to discuss later, music, even in terms of fields of writing. And they don't understand sometimes how there is a metaphysical, almost a metaphysical connection when you put your pen to paper and then you become inspired. So sometimes even the process in which this happens, many people don't have that appreciation, because we place emphasis on, is this person a doctor, are they a lawyer, are they an architect? We tend to put things into these kind of binaries, which are not very nuanced when we look at general skills of people.
You know, I think we tend to forget as well as Muslims, you know, the history of Islam and the way the Quran came down. And subhanAllah, you know, the Quran and the way that it came down, and its beautiful recitation in itself, came down to the Arabs, who were very fond of their poetry, who were very articulate, who, mashallah, were really blessed in being able to say things in such a way that, you know, the fact that the message of Allah came down in such a way that flabbergasted people at the time, you know, and they thought, what kind of poetry is this? The fact that the Quran in itself, you know, it is in a form of poetry.
It sits between poetry and prose.
It's exactly, that the fact that Islam came down in this way as a testament to people who actually revered poetry is also a testament to the fact that, you know, art and Islam do come together. I think it's we've kind of drifted off from, you know, how, like you mentioned, Islam is all-encompassing, it's very holistic. We've kind of drifted off from that, and we've kind of got this view that, you know, academia is the way forward with everything, and that artistic sort of expression doesn't really have a place in today's society. But I think it's not even within the Muslim community alone, but even in the wider community, people don't tend to appreciate, you know, the artistic form unless, you know, it's, you know, somebody who's being bigged up by the media, or someone who is long past, subhanAllah, that they're trying to sell paintings
or if somebody's streaked or something, for example.
Yeah, no, it's just, I think we tend to forget that connection between the beauty of the recitation of the Quran and the fact that it in itself was an art form as well, and the fact that even within the recitation we have 12 styles as well. So subhanAllah, it's really amazing, you know, the scope that we have within our deen.
Absolutely. And I think even when you look at the Quran, for example, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's our creator, He's all-wise, He's all-knowing, and He wants us to know the Quran. So the fact that He decided to do it in a particular way that has that, like you said, we can't call it poetry, but it has an artist can look at it, or a poet can look at it and say this has artistic elements to it, and even like the rhyme pattern and the structure and the scheme and the melody, even like some of my non-Muslim cousins, she's like, oh, I like the way you sing to God, you know what I mean? Like they think the recitation, the Quran is singing for them, but the fact is that it helps us to memorize it. Like it helps us, the melody, the rhythm of it is a useful tool. So it shows how we are designed in a way that the human mind is designed to kind of incline towards a more artistic style. Like I don't really know anyone who's memorized, any child that's memorized the Bible necessarily, or memorized the Old Testament necessarily, because it's not part of their culture, but the structure of it doesn't incline towards that. No. Whereas like with the Quran, you've got, I mean, thousands upon thousands of kids under 10 have memorized, you know, the Quran.
It just goes to show that the fact, you know, we say as Muslims that Allah loves beauty. I think, and one of the beauties is the fact that, you know, the recitation of the Quran in itself is an art form as well. You know, the fact that we have tajweed, you know, that teaches us how to recite in such a way that is pleasing to Allah is a testament in itself. You know, and subhanAllah, you know, Sister Sakina kind of touched upon the fact that, you know, it's really important in the remembrance of Allah when you have, you know, art. subhanallah, what is it with the fire alarms? So, you know,
at least it works. That's a good thing.
Alhamdulillah, it means that we're safe.
Exactly.
So, Sister Laika, why is the remembrance of Allah and its manifestation important in enhancing art and the artistic persona?
So firstly, I'd like to say, you know, creative personas are usually associated with people who are creating new visuals or creating new possibilities. But, you know, in Islam and in the Quran and the Sunnah, it shows us that, you know, pursuing our passions in itself is artistic. So if we look at things like logical and analytical thinking, I know you were saying like becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer.
Sorry, sis, I'm going to have to stop you there. Unfortunately, we do have to go to a break, but inshallah, we'll be right back to continue with the discussion, so don't go anywhere. But before we go, here's a quick look at this week's competition. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to today's topic of arts and spirituality, where we're continuing the discussion with our sisters Laika and Nusrat and Sister Sakina, mashallah. Sorry, Laika, I cut you off just before we went on the break, and you were talking to us about how the remembrance of God actually enhances art. So if you can continue from where we were, inshallah.
Okay, so I was kind of saying that in Islam, you know, the Quran and the Sunnah, they encourage us to pursue our passions, whether it be logical and analytical thinking. I know we were saying earlier, you know, there's, you know, doctor, lawyer, blah, 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 and that doesn't fit into the artistic scheme of things. But I think it does. I think there's beauty and I think there's art to, you know, performing operations, doing surgeries. I think that's a form of art. And also, you know, being able to recite the Quran beautifully. I think you picked up on it earlier. My little cousin's learning to become a Hafiz Quran. He's about 12 years old. And on my cousin's henna night, he recited the Quran, and it was so beautiful. It nearly made everyone cry. And you know, when you see someone so young reading so beautifully, and it just makes you think of something, wow, this is art, like this is beautiful. You know, creativity in spoken language, public speaking. A lot of people have a knack for, you know, speaking in front of loads of people. I think that's a form of art because not everyone has it. It's pretty unique. Also, you know, the politics can be defined as the art of ruling human societies. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his practice of ijtihad, it refers to intellectual and critical battle to search for answers on new problems. Because he introduced a new faith and it had so many different problems, and there was an art form, you know, to tackling those problems and the way he did it. And he actually said, there's a hadith, and he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beautiful and he loves beauty, like you mentioned that hadith earlier. So our appreciation of this can be actually, you know, a testimony to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Definitely.
Sorry, Laika, just to kind of correct you there, alhamdulillah, you gave us a lot of good information, but alhamdulillah, the Prophet ﷺ actually received a divine revelation from Allah, so ijtihad was kind of left to us, you know, not so wonderful people, but alhamdulillah, later generations were able to perform ijtihad, but alhamdulillah, you know, we do find a lot of things, mashallah, where, you know, art and, you know, the manifestation of it comes through the worship of Allah. Not just Allah, but you find it in many sort of societies where art has been taken up as a form of worship, and subhanallah, you know, we find it everywhere, and we find, I think, I was reading a quote from Michelangelo saying that art is being able to celebrate the divine perfection. So when we look at, you know, the artistry in which Allah has created the universe and this earth and everything that He's made, you know, you sit there and you think, subhanallah, how beautiful is this, you know? And that in itself is even inspiration for other things that you'd want to do. Yeah. So I think it's coming back to sort of the basics as well. You know, subhanallah, we kind of go off on a tangent sometimes.
Definitely. And I also want to just comment on what like I said, because I think it's really important that, like, we do understand that, like, art is the beautification of the mundane, you know. So, like, if, like you said, if you are performing surgery with absolute excellence, you know, and you know what I mean, like, you maybe take creativity into what you do. You could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, like that. There is art in that, you know. That's why they'll say the art to, I don't know, you know, the art to drinking tea, or the art to, you know what I'm saying, there's creativity. And I think also the person who's receptive to art is someone who has an appreciative heart. So like you said, like, you could just cut open an orange and just look at the patterns within that piece of fruit, and it just be like, subhanallah, my Lord is the best of, you know what I'm saying, creators. It reminds you, the beauty of it is an inspiration towards remembrance, you know, because it's a beautification of something that we take, you know, for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it lets lets you appreciate everything that's around you. I think when you stop to look at the things, actually appreciate them, not just on sort of the outward scale, but even the intricacies, the details, and even what they do, you know, their function. Yes, so, alhamdulillah, you know, we have so many things that we can appreciate. But, you know, sometimes when we think about Islamic history, we don't tend to think about Islamic history in the context of art and spirituality and how art has influenced the spirituality. So, Sister Nusrat, can you give us some examples of that?
Art and spirituality influences many things, such as, for example, calligraphy. We find that actually it transpires, calligraphy in Sufism actually transpires in even the handwriting of individuals. For example, a irritable person, their calligraphy would be very skewed and broken. And it's actually a training on refining the ego and the soul when you're having to take time and actually transpire and do it a certain way. We have people like Sheikh Hamdullah who actually are very good calligraphers as well, who are a testament to that. It inspires discipline. Within the realms of music and poetry, we have that spirituality has greatly influenced that. We have people like Jalaluddin Rumi. We even have Rumi's Cave that's dedicated to that. We even have, for example, your group and what you do. Historically, we have Imam al-Busiri, who is an Egyptian Berber Sufi poet. He's from the Shadiliya Sufi order, and he's famous for the Qasida Burda, which is the poem of the mantle, and it's used often very much in Mawlids and Hadras. We have people like Imam Abdullah al-Haddad, the Yemeni Sufi, who wrote the Kafani il-Murabi, which is My Lord has sufficed in me. And this, again, is sung in many gatherings all over the world, particularly, especially by people like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, Timothy Winter, who's almost famous for his rendition and the way he does it as well. We even have to date how it's actually influenced even people coming up within Nasheed artists as well. We have people like Hamza Yusuf who have done Allahu Allahu Qasida, and many other sheikhs that have gone on to do that, particularly Moroccan murshids. And even within Senegal, we have that tradition being kept up within the Tijani Sufi order as well.
I think it's a really good reminder that, subhanAllah, we have such a rich history when it comes to arts and spirituality, that even Imam Shafi'i himself, before he actually went on to learn the deen in depth, he'd actually started to learn poetry before he learnt the Arabic language, because he said, how can you know the language if you don't understand the poetry? So in order to be able to understand, you need to understand the poetry. So I think it's a really good emphasis to know that, you know, the art form, different types of art forms are a really good way in expanding your mind and actually being able to grasp things a lot better than you would have done had you not looked into different art forms. So subhanAllah, it's just like...
Yeah, I think with art as well, you can look at architecture throughout Islamic history. So, you know, we had the Ottoman period where there, you know, were so many amazing pieces of architecture that were built. For example, the Selimiye Mosque in Turkey, that was built in 1569 to 1575, and it's considered one of the highest achievements of Islamic architecture. And I can describe it a little bit for you. There are 4 really, really tall, like, minarets, and they're extremely tall, and they kind of point. They come to a point, and you can see them throughout the whole city, and there's like a really beautiful blue and cream kind of colouring, and it makes it look really like serene, really calm. So that's one mosque, the Dome of the Rock, which I'm sure you've all heard of, in the old city of Jerusalem, and this was completed the order of the Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik during the second fitna, and this is incredibly beautiful. There's a gold dome, and it's really, really shiny. So, you know, when the sun hits it, and it reflects everywhere. And, you know, it's in a place where it's really plain. Surrounding it, it's really plain, and it's all dust and everything. And the colour of the blue and the gold, when it gets together and you can just see it from so far away, it's incredibly beautiful. There's one more, which I actually was able to visit in Tunisia. It's called the Great Mosque of Kairouan. And I wanted to show you my holiday picture, but actually, unfortunately, I'm not wearing hijab in that picture because I was really young then. But this was built in 670 AD, and it is incredibly beautiful because it's all beige and the floor is white marble. And when you're walking around, it's just so serene, so calming. And you go inside, and all the prayer, you know, the carpetry is all green. So even inside, the interior design is so beautiful as well. So you look at so many examples throughout Islamic history. Architecture is a form of expressing art.
I think it's also beautiful because obviously within Islam we have certain restrictions on what we can and can't do, so especially when it comes to the art form of drawing and painting and things like that. We know that it's not really permissible to draw human beings or animals, and that kind of led to the beautiful geometrical patterns that you find in a lot of the Muslim world, and how that beautifies a lot of buildings, a lot of homes. And you know, you find that even within certain sort of borders that have been set through the criteria of what's Islamically acceptable, you find so many people have actually found a way to be able to express their love of Allah and express their love of art as well through even within these boundaries.
Definitely. And I just wanted to also touch on what Laika was saying as well, like what we have to remember, especially from an Islamic perspective or an Islamic spirituality perspective, is that the role of the art was to take you to a spiritual place. It was to allow you to have some kind of spiritual experience. So how you're describing the mosque, like you mentioned, serenity, or like the magnificence of the dome, or you know what I'm saying, the green. It makes you feel something. It makes you feel something. It's not like spirituality is here for, that's us and Allah, and then it's like art for art's sake. It's to take you somewhere. You know, I'm actually currently reading a really good book called Art and Spirituality by someone called Syed Hussein Nasser, who's a lecturer from America, originally of Iranian descent. And so he goes through all the different forms of Islamic art form, from Rumi's poetry of Rumi to like music and like calligraphy and all these different things. And one of the things that he touched on was concerning music, and obviously music has different opinions, but one of the things he was saying was that then
finding that connection between what you're doing and Allah, I think is one of those important
exactly
things.
And but what he was explaining was that people were using the instrumentation and the singing to take people to a place. It wasn't just let's worship here and then let's have a good time over here. It was like, no, like they're trying to take you somewhere. If you read the poetry of Rumi, it's supposed to allow you to have a taste of something, you know, that you read it and it makes you feel like you're supposed to feel something.
SubhanAllah, you know? But I think that's one of those things, is when we have an intention to worship Allah in all that we do, we will find that way of worship through many things, and art is definitely one of those things, SubhanAllah. So Jazakallah khair for that, sisters. Spirituality and art are not mutually exclusive, nor should they be divorced from one another. Rather, the two are complementary of one another and are used as means of drawing closer to God and enhancing the artistic persona. This has been such an interesting discussion, but if you've missed any of today's show, you can catch a repeat, inshallah, in the evening, or you can catch at 11 p.m. this evening, or at Sunday at 3 p.m. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's show, but do join us again tomorrow, where we'll be continuing the marriage series and discussing the reasons for divorce. But before we go, here's a reminder of this week's competition.